Our friend from Mercy Health, Dr. Dennis Norem, has been joining us throughout the pandemic, discussing what's going on with COVID-19, some of the latest particulars, where we're going, where we've been, and other things. Dr. Norem, good morning to you.
Good morning to you guys.
How's everything going with you this morning?
It's going well. I'm experiencing something in Arizona I haven't seen any previous times. Is a absolute downpour of rain.
What?
Last night when I got in, it rained, poured for 30 minutes.
I was going to say, okay, well, that covers the year then, doesn't it?
Probably. Probably. Actually, they've been getting quite a bit of rain. They call it the monsoon season here over the last couple months. But it's usually just little intermittent showers here and there. But this was an absolute downpour.
No derecho-like?
Yeah, that derecho we had around here. Can you imagine that out in Arizona, how many cactuses would go flying? All right. Well, on to the topic at hand, and that, of course, is what's going on with COVID-19. Dr. Norem, I saw this one this morning, headline reading, COVID-19 recoveries here in America have surpassed 2 million, according to Johns Hopkins. Leading the world in confirmed coronavirus cases does the U.S., but we rank third in overall recoveries, with Brazil with 3.1 million recoveries from 3.8 million confirmed cases. India, 2.6 million recoveries out of 3.4 million cases.
Yeah, interesting. It implies that we're not doing quite as well in terms of treatment, which I find hard to believe because we've really been on the forefront of treatment. Again, you have to wonder about the statistics around the world in terms of testing and adequacy of testing. We still struggle in this country trying to get enough tests in certain areas of the country, as you've seen. So I don't know. I don't know how to interpret that.
I'm looking at some of the numbers. They say that from that perspective, as you mentioned, our figure of 2.1 million recoveries out of nearly 6 million cases doesn't look so good. Why is the big gap there? It boils down to disparities in reporting, because there aren't nationwide guidelines for reporting. Recovery figures are all over the place.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's very difficult to make any conclusions about that in terms of how we're doing in terms of treatment.
One of the things they mentioned in the article, though, is has been reported many people who have had it can face long-term health challenges, long-term significant health consequences, especially for people who've been hospitalized. Lung issues, kidney issues, some of those things can happen from COVID-19, and they might not be recovered from those at the time those 30 days are up.
Well, absolutely. I think we've mentioned that before, that it's still a little bit unclear what are all the long-term consequences, but clearly there are respiratory effects, and there are probably some significant long-term respiratory effects, especially in patients who are intubated for long periods of time.
So just to be clear, because, we get a lot of our, as America, we get a lot of our health information from infographics on Facebook and Twitter, which isn't the best place to go. When you see things like this, we don't get what the meanings all mean. So as far as recovery from COVID-19, what would you deem to be, what would qualify for recovery from COVID?
In terms of our population, you mean?
In terms of case by case, if I got COVID, say I got diagnosed with COVID and I had my symptoms, when would I be recovered from it?
I think it's when you're no longer having a fever for 3 or 4 days and your other symptoms, whatever they might be, headache, cough, myalgias, muscle aches, those things have resolved. On the other hand, as we've just mentioned, there are people that may never completely recover because they may have impairments, especially in terms of their lungs, their breathing, their coughing, their oxygenation. Those things may never recover. But for most people, the symptoms going in should resolve on the other end, and they should be at that point called recovered.
Have you personally or somebody within your office dealt with somebody that's had some of the longer term effects, some lung problems post COVID?
I am not personally aware of that. I didn't have any patients who had any serious complications. I worked with a nurse who was hospitalized for a week, but she appeared to have recovered. As I worked with her after, she was out of the hospital and back to work, and as far as I could tell, she didn't have any long-term consequences.
So this isn't something that somebody out there who may be dealing with it right now is thinking to themselves, wait, I have a lifetime of this to deal with afterwards? Not necessarily, but you can't rule it out either. Is that fair?
I think that's a fair statement, and I think that would need follow-up, especially in terms of the effects on the lungs. That seems to be one of the major issues. The other thing I probably should mention is people can have, other organ systems affected. Obviously, we've talked about the blood clots and the effects that can have on people, and those can have long-term effects on the heart and other organs in the body. So there may be other things besides the lungs related to being seriously ill with COVID.
And one of the other numbers and figures that especially I saw floating around yesterday was an infographic saying that only 6% of COVID reported deaths were actually caused by COVID. What does that mean? If reading into it, I thought that the comorbidities were being responsible for the deaths that COVID brought on. You mind clearing up what that figure means when science says or a figure says only 6% of all deaths are responsible or COVID responsible?
Before you jump in, I got the piece that you're talking about sitting right here in front of me. Yeah, it says Centers for Disease Control and Prevention released new data that depicts how many Americans who died from COVID-19 also had contributing conditions. According to the report, only 6% of deaths have COVID-19 listed as their only cause mentioned, revealing 94% of patients who died from coronavirus also had other, quote, health conditions and contributing causes.
Well, I would say two things about that. Number one, as we mentioned before, it's people with comorbidities who are most susceptible to dying. We all realize that, be it heart disease, lung disease, obesity, diabetes, and other factors we're not always aware of. The second piece of that is the data itself. Having signed death certificates and seen death certificates over the years, unfortunately, sometimes what happens is when physicians are given the death certificate, they only put down one cause, and there may have been comorbidities listed. So it may be that the person had some, and they just put down the COVID-19 and didn't bother to list anything else. Because I think most people who succumb to COVID have comorbidities, and that certainly contributes to their death.
Is that the same thing? We hear flu deaths sometimes. Is it kind of the same thing? People don't necessarily die from the flu, but they die from comorbidities they have while experiencing the flu.
Comorbidities and flu affects the respiratory tract, and they typically end up with a pneumonia, probably a bacterial pneumonia that kind of comes along because their system is so affected by the flu. So yeah, okay. Even though something else technically caused their death, ultimately it really is because they got the flu.
And we've had some of these stories reported. I'm thinking of the guy down in Florida who was killed in a motorcycle accident, and cause of death was listed as COVID-19 because he had tested positive for COVID-19, but was killed because he hit a truck with his motorcycle. So this is what we're talking about, as well as some of the reporting going in that we can't necessarily be absolutely sure what the cause was.
Well, true. So somebody just picked that out of the air because they found they had COVID, which is unfortunate. That should have probably been listed as a comorbidity, not as the cause of death. On the other hand, there's still a lot of discussions about excess deaths and how much of those could be COVID in terms of trying to figure that out, and that remains to be seen. But it appears that most areas of the country are experiencing significant excess deaths that probably are related to COVID.
Okay.
Are we anywhere with new testing methods, new ideas about how we get results quicker, better, faster, more accurately? Anybody else stepped up over the last 7 days since we talked and said, "Hey, I've got a promising new idea"?
Yeah, Abbott, I think, just got approved for a rapid test by the FDA last week, which I think is the second one that's going to be approved, and they're in the process of trying to get that out to the general public. So I think that'll be very helpful. The other thing I just read about, which is fascinating, which happened here in Tucson at the University of Arizona, is they're testing the wastewater at the university. they're testing the sewage, and they found in one of the dorms RNA, which is genetic material related to COVID-19. So they went in and tested all 311 occupants of the dorm, and they found 2 asymptomatic carriers. And so they've quarantined that group of kids, and they think they've been able to stop a little hotspot.
Yeah, I read that too. Yeah, basically, University of Arizona stopped an outbreak before it happened, just by testing. Now, the wastewater testing like that won't work for general populations, correct?
No, but I think it's a good example of saying, where are we having problems? Well, we're having problems in college, no question. The kids go to college and they don't behave, as we've talked about before. Mm-hmm. So several colleges are doing this testing to try to stop these outbreaks before they get any further.
This new Abbott rapid test you're talking about, is that a saliva test as well, or do you still need to draw blood?
I don't believe that's a saliva test like the other more rapid test. I believe it's still a swab, but I believe it's a swab like the flu swab. It's not quite as aggressive, and it's easier to do. And I believe the way they're set up, they're going to be able to do flu and COVID off the same swab. Oh. That was my understanding.
Speaking of flu, when's a good time for people to start considering that little variable coming into play?
Well, my understanding is that the pharmacies have the flu shots available. For most people, it's probably okay to wait till the end of September, early October. But if a person has any doubt about when they can get it, if they think about it, they should go ahead and get it. What we don't want to see, as we again talked about before, and the concern is a bad flu season. There's a big concern that we're going to have that on top of COVID-19, which are going to create some real stresses on the healthcare system.
Absolutely. And any concern if we do get a COVID vaccine of it playing well with a flu vaccine? Would you see any reason why you couldn't get both at the same time?
No, I see absolutely no reason. We do flu vaccines along with pneumonia shots. We've done that along with other killed vaccines over the years. And I don't see any problem. Obviously, a new vaccine, there's always that concern that we don't quite know all the long-term side effects, but I would encourage the public to really get the vaccine when it becomes available and be sure to get a flu shot. Absolutely.
You know, COVID won't be with us forever, but I'm reading a piece from the Associated Press this morning saying that one thing that may be sticking around because people seem to like it for the most part, and that is telehealth or telemedicine going on well beyond the pandemic. You have thoughts?
I believe so. I think as we as providers have become much more comfortable with it, and the public has also, by kind of being forced into it, that down the road, many physicians are going to continue to do telehealth. The other thing that's happened, which has also really pushed it along, is the payers. It was very restricted in terms of payment prior to COVID-19, and it appears that the payers are going to continue to pay, specifically Medicare and the private insurers, which will make it certainly more accessible. Obviously, it has its limitations. For certain types of practices, I think it can work quite well. For others, not so well. But again, I think we're going to see telehealth stick around, absolutely.
Well, it's good to see that money's playing a part in how we keep healthy around here.
Money plays a part in everything.
Oh.
Follow that
Always.
money. Yeah, 27% of older adults who had not had a telemedicine visit were concerned about privacy, compared to only 17% who had had a telemedicine visit. And those who tried it weren't completely sold. 4 in 5 were concerned their doctor couldn't physically examine them. 64% worried the quality wasn't as good. Those were numbers for people who had not had a telemedicine visit. Those numbers shrunk considerably from people who did have one and walked away from it impressed.
Yeah, and that's I think what I've experienced too. I mean, I was pretty negative about it, and I tried it a few times. It was okay within its limitations, but I can see certain types of practices like psychiatry and mental health practices. I think telehealth is a really excellent tool for those providers. for me in internal medicine over the years, a lot of things need to be examined. On the other hand, there are visits that don't really need much of an exam, and you could do a decent evaluation and treatment on a telehealth visit.
Yeah, well, according to this, looking at the numbers, it's not something that we'll see going away anytime soon. Hopefully, coronavirus, yes. Telemedicine, no. We'll see how it all shakes out. Dr. Norem, as always, we appreciate the time and the expertise. And as Joe so rudely pointed out at the beginning, we're nowhere near the end of this thing. So, if you'd like to continue with us, we would love to talk to you again next Monday and see what the latest is.
Absolutely. I'll see you guys next Monday.